I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Kate again to talk about diabetes. Diabetes, as mentioned, it's a pandemic. It's not an epidemic. It's actually a pandemic. I think everybody in this room is probably close to insulin resistance, pre-diabetic, diabetic. And if we don't do something about this, it's going to kill more people than most wars combined. It's going to create tremendous amount of dysfunction in families. When you have blindness, you get amputations, you go into the hospital 3 times a week for dialysis. So it's really something that we all need to get serious about. And what's really sad, it's a totally preventative disease, and at the early stage it's even reversible. But for most people, it's just giving some medication, managing the disease so you can eat like you normally eat, and then the complications start, and it just goes downhill from there. So please, Dr. Kate Delahanty, tell us what we should do about diabetes.
Wait. Hello. I feel really tall. This is awesome. Okay, cool. Well, let me just find my clicker here. Well, yes, we're going to talk about diabetes. Crazy. How can we, in today's age, have a disease that we completely do to ourselves? I mean, we completely do it to ourselves with our lifestyle and our nutrition, or our lack of nutrition, I should say, and our lack of cellular health, and the inflammation of the gut, and our thyroid insufficiencies, and all these other things. We do this to ourselves. I get this great lecture right just after lunch when you guys want to have a sleep. Stay awake. Okay, here we go. Oh, come on. Is my doodad?
What are you shooting at? It's probably not the screen you want to be shooting at. Where's the thing?
My doodad's broken.
Stop shooting at the screen.
Can you do it manually, Rosie?
You want to just say next screen?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. In fact, what I'll get you to do, darling, is just put each of the whole, actually, we got to go back a bit.
Right now?
Yep. Oh,
Right now?
It's working.
okay.
So we just push it this way?
I think I'm missing some slides.
Here.
Thanks.
Go forward.
Okay, cool.
Ideally, aim it to it back.
Aim it at that? Okay, perfect. Is that my first slide? Is that my first slide?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm missing some. Okay, that's cool. Okay, okay, look, we're going to go back to Greek times. Greek are responsible for many things from there's many things that we have learned with regard to medicine from them. I mean, even in the area of herbology, or some of the areas that we study in naturopathy, we get a lot of the hardcore information back from these days. Nothing's changed. We still use the same herbs. We still do the same things. But they were a leader, and as they said, diabetes means to go through. So the Greek physician, Apollonius of Memphis, he credited it with using the disorder for its top symptom, that they noticed that people were just urinating a lot. And so to notice that in those times, didn't have necessarily a particular word for it other than diabetes, but they really hadn't quite at that point figured out what the story was. Again, the Greek, Indian, Arabs, Egyptians, and Chinese were, again, aware of the condition, but no one could really figure out what its cause was. And so, thousands of years. There's so much documentation, so many manuscripts written on this, it's not funny, but they really did recognize it. And again, it would have been for the very same reasons in some cases, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of nutrition, etc. The ancient Indians were well aware of it. And they used to do something, and again, there's a lot of documentation on this, where they actually used to have the patient urinate and then wanted to see if the sugar ants would come and attack the urine. And if they did, they went, oh, they've got that condition, of which we're not quite sure what to do with it, but they identified it. In 1921, a couple of scientists got pretty smart, and they successfully extracted insulin from healthy dogs. They then went and put it into other dogs, but some of the dogs survived, and some of the dogs didn't, the ones that actually had diabetes. And the reason for that was it wasn't until 1936, I believe, where they actually realized, they wrote this up in Diabetic Medicine, then they realized that there's in fact two types. There was an insulin sensitive and an insulin insensitive, ergo type 1 and type 2. So it took them quite a few years between 1921 and 1936 to actually come around to that thought process. So type 1 diabetes, body doesn't make insulin. Your immune system attacks and destroys the cells in your pancreas that make the insulin. It's usually diagnosed in children and young adults, and it can appear at any age. Type 1, they need to take insulin every day to survive. They're an interesting group of individuals to treat from a dietary point of view. Often I've got them after, obviously, they've been diabetics for a really long time. And one of the difficulties that I face is that they have been eating inappropriately in terms of trying to manage their blood glucose levels in addition to taking the insulin that they're taking. Their choices, their food choices are often not very good. So trying to wean them off of the little snacky things they have all day, which are inappropriate for their condition, as well as make sure that they're measuring and they're trying to get some exercise and they're trying to do the lifestyle things that they need to do. It can make it very difficult to look after type 1s nutritively. Type 2, again, the body does not make or use insulin well, and you can develop it at any age during childhood, or even during childhood, excuse me. One of the things that we've noticed, we often, historically we've seen it kind of a middle-aged thing, but maybe in the last 20 years, we're starting to see kids, little kids, I mean, kids in my office that are, 8 years old, 10 years old, exhibiting symptoms that are just scaring the heck out of me. And I have to have the conversations with the parents because I can't, nutritively consult with an 8-year-old. The person who's cooking the food for the 8-year-old is the parent. So we've got to get the parents to change. We've got to treat the parents essentially. We can't really treat the children on that fashion. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I still have this urge to point it at that. I know I'm not supposed to. And then we've got the third type, which is gestational diabetes. It develops in someone when they are pregnant. Often it resolves itself once the baby's born. If someone's had gestational diabetes, though, we keep an eye on them because often it's possible that they could actually develop type 2 later in life. So we have to keep a little bit of an eye on that. Now here's just a breakdown just so that you can kind of see the differences. Jump down off my perch. So you can see the differences with the type 1, the type 2, and the gestational, and you can just see the risk factors in terms of how we look at it. Type 1 is genetic and environmental, but we come to type 2, obviously obesity, older age, family of personal history of the disease, nutrition, the whole shoot and match. We can treat type 2 with diet, exercise, and sometimes oral drugs or insulin. And what we want to try and do, and what I want to talk to you about today, is we don't often have to go to this oral drugs or insulin. Not with this type 2 story. We can really, really turn this around if we have appropriate time and the information about the patient to be able to do that. Obviously with type 1, we just treat with insulin. We can't prevent it at this point. And then we have the gestational, and again, it's similar to type 2, but we just have to keep an eye on our people post their pregnancy for how we're going to treat them. Now, I just put this slide in because it just fascinated me in terms of up until 20 years ago, we didn't see type 2 diabetes in children. We didn't see it at all. In fact, it was once referred to as an adult onset, but then eventually, and we were calling it juvenile diabetes. And then eventually, more and more cases, and now it's common. I mean, I don't know how many primaries in here who see these kids come in every single day, and you think, that kid's too young to have diabetes, or pre-diabetic, and the kid is pre-diabetic, so it's a bit of a surprise. So now we've now just kind of like it type 2, we're not even calling it juvenile anymore. Race and ethnicity also affects the risk. Of particular note are Asian Americans. They're great in their own country. They come to the United States, and all of a sudden, the nutrition's very different. The stuff they get out of their food is very different. The way they process it is very different. They often end up with massive inflammatory conditions with regard to their gut, and these are at particularly high risk of getting diabetes, not in their own country, only when they come here. And just again, some more numbers here, just because it's staggering. 422 million people in the world have this. That's about 1 of every 11. 1 out of 4 don't even know they have it. I'm not talking about a pre-diabetic state here. I'm talking about 1 in 4 people don't know they actually have diabetes. And then the main types, we talked about type 1, type 2, and type 3. And who is at risk? Well, of course, being overweight, poor diet and lifestyle, 45 years or older, parent or sibling. Interesting, the parent or sibling habit, jury's out a little bit on that because we still refer back to, lifestyle, we still refer back to nutrition. And of course, if your parents were feeding you and their parents were feeding them and so forth, it's sort of self-perpetuated in the family unit. So I'm not sure about that one. Physically active 3 times a week and had diabetes while pregnant. So these are all sort of the obvious places that we look when we're looking at someone who's potentially a type 2 diabetic. Okay, let's look at all the 10 signs. You guys are going to have half these because you just ate. So extreme fatigue, unusual thirst, dark patches, tingling or numbness. Where are we? Itchy. That's a really interesting one. I get a lot of pre-diabetics that I see are often itching like crazy in the practice. And that's something I've just recently noticed maybe in the last year. Erection issues, increased hunger. Had a gentleman come in, the guy's taken more blue pills than anybody I know. That's not healthy. But what we actually realized is he was in a pre-diabetic state. Increased hunger, frequent or recurring infections. Again, that's a biggie. Again, I'm getting sort of 45 plus individuals coming in, and they're just always sick. So that's the first thing we do. We send them out to get an A1C, among many other things that we're going to test just to check and see what's going on. Weight loss is often the least symptom that I see out of all of them.